One of our big issues in the oceans today is plastic, and particularly what we call microbeads. Certainly we can see examples where wildlife gets plastic caught up in its gut, around its feet or its wings, and that's bad news for the environment. As science has progressed over recent years, it's becoming evident that these plastics not only break down mechanically to smaller and smaller particles, but those particles then get ingested by marine life. They're like sponges, they absorb the pollutants of the oceans. Even ones we banned many years ago, like DDT, which are still out there, get absorbed by these microparticles. And that means they get introduced to the marine food chain. So what we need to do now is have a look at some of these products in a bit more detail and how they can impact our environment. So we're now moving down to the laboratory on board Calista and looking at some of the things we find in our everyday lives that impact our environment. We're used to seeing sort of plastic items like water bottles, food containers of various sorts, and of course the dreaded plastic bag. And we've reduced, in some cases, the amount we use these things. Plastic bag use has reduced dramatically as countries around the world have introduced fees for the plastic bags. But also, if we're sensible, these things are recyclable. And we're short of plastics. The plastic industry needs this stuff to be recycled because it needs more plastic raw material. But when they break down to smaller and smaller particles. And these things can last in the environment for many hundreds of years. But the real danger comes through these things, microbeads. And microbeads are difficult because we can't recycle them, we can't catch them. They're like sand. And once we've used them, we tend to wash them down the drain. Whether they're in cleaning products, cosmetics, whatever it happens to be, we've got no way of trapping them. And they're too small to be caught in the sewage processing farms. And so they end up ultimately in the oceans and they work their way into the food chain of the marine environment. That's not just causing toxicity in the food chain, but it's also causing starvation, because if a zooplankton decides to eat one of these instead of a smaller zooplankton or phytoplankton, it then gets stuck in its gut and it means that zooplankton dies. There are trillions of these things on the planet today. There are trillions of zooplankton. And you could argue, surely we can afford to lose a few zooplankton, but we can't. They are at the base of the food chain, along with the phytoplankton. And if we take out that base, that has a huge knock-on effect as you go up through the food chain, ultimately culminating its knock-on effect on us human beings. Now, we get a much higher volume of these microbeads and these plastics in the coastal seas. And we're ideally suited in Southampton, being an industrial port, being a major city, to study the impact of these microbeads on the environment. There's work going on in conjunction with other universities in the region to try and understand how these microbeads impact the oyster population of the region. It's an important and a growing commercial application, and we need to understand whether these oysters are accumulating these plastics, and along with them the toxins that go into the plastics. And so it's really important we get this right today.